This podcast is brought to you by the Prospect Research Institute, where researchers come to learn, innovate, and connect.
Commercial real estate, people would generally say, covers office buildings, they would cover industrial properties, and retail properties.
Welcome to Prospect Research Chat Bites, a podcast by and for prospect research professionals. I'm Jennifer Filla. Today, I'm talking with Alan Thomas, president of Thomas Charitable Advisors, LLC. Hello, Alan. Thank you for joining me today on Chat Bites.
Jen, it's such a pleasure to be with you. We've been great colleagues for such a long time, and it's my pleasure to be with you and your audience today.
Yes, we have been. I'm so glad to have you on. We've been colleagues and friends. It's been more than a decade. I don't want to count specifics. And in particular, Alan, I credit you for my prospect research career. If you hadn't hired me way back when at the Devereaux Foundation, I may never have stumbled upon what I consider the greatest career for me. So thank you.
Well, we've been great colleagues, and you were a fantastic staff member that we really enjoyed having you. So thank you.
It was a bundle of fun. I look back and I realize that it was the one of those jobs, very few in my career, where we did a lot of laughing. So that's good stuff.
Yes, we did.
Now, I do want to tap into your real estate background today and ask you questions, but before that, I'm hoping that you'll share with everybody a little bit about your career journey. Like now you're in consulting with Plan Giving, but how did you get there?
Well, that's a great question. The early part of my career, after I came out of college, was in real estate finance and commercial real estate and corporate real estate. I worked for Aetna Life and Casualty. I worked for Mass Mutual Life Insurance Company, doing significant real estate transactions for them. And then I gravitated midway through my career to the not-for-profit community, where I worked for Devereaux, where you and I worked together all those years ago. And I was in a real estate capacity at Devereaux, and then I transitioned from my real estate work into fundraising. And that's how we became such good colleagues. So I'd say the first half of my career was in proprietary real estate sector. And then the last half has been in fundraising. It's been a joyful process, and I love working with my not-for-profit clients. So that's kind of the transition there.
So way back when you got your JD, when you became an attorney, would you have imagined where you are now?
Not at all, Jen. You know, I was a go-go real estate guy at the beginning of my career. It's just been interesting to see how I got involved in the not-for-profit community and how that became such a meaningful part of my life to provide service to others. So it's been a fulfilling change, and I would never have guessed it when I first started in my career.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Speaking of real estate, so in the US, real estate is public, and we really rely upon that. Sometimes it's the only piece of information we can find. And so most of us in research, we know all about, where to go to look to find if someone owns a home. I think where a lot of us don't have much experience is with commercial real estate. So we know how to estimate, home values. We have Zillow out there that helps us with things like that. But it's a little more mysterious when some of our prospects own commercial real estate. I'm wondering what's important for us to know about commercial real estate when we look at a prospect and a prospect's wealth picture.
Great question. So let me first of all sort of define what we mean about commercial real estate. Commercial real estate, people would generally say, covers office buildings, they would cover industrial properties, and retail properties, non-residential properties that generally are utilized in a business capacity of one sort or another. And when your researchers go online and look at real estate holdings, typically they'll find addresses of properties. And depending upon the level of analysis that your prospect researchers are doing, they may actually pull up information about those properties that they find online. oftentimes, but not necessarily, but oftentimes the commercial real estate properties, those addresses may also appear. They would not if they're held in a business name or an LLC. So it may be a little harder to identify those business properties, these commercial properties, than the residential properties. I don't have any magical wand that I can say this will help you identify the commercial properties. If you find that your prospect researchers are identifying businesses that are owned by the donor prospects, you oftentimes can then go into a review and research those businesses to see what kind of properties they may own. So I think that's another level of investigation that your researchers can do to identify the business and commercial properties. Once you've identified that there is a commercial real estate property that may be owned by a prospect, the process of identifying value and how that contributes to the wealth picture is a little more complicated, as you pointed out, than your typical residential situation. So in a commercial property valuation, the appraiser or the person who's trying to identify a value would look to comparable sales, which is typically how a residential property is valued. It's almost exclusively by comparable sales. But there's another valuation approach called the income approach to valuation. And that oftentimes is the more important valuation tool for a commercial property. And the bottom line to the income approach is what are the revenue and expenses that are associated with a particular property. And when you identify what the net income from a commercial property is, how does that translate into a value? So that's a more complicated process, and I'm not suggesting that your researchers should try in any shape or fashion trying to understand the details of the income approach, only to understand that there is an additional step that is oftentimes involved in trying to determine a value for a commercial property. So the mystery here with commercial properties is that it requires a little more investigation to find them because, as I said, they may be in business names or in LLCs. But once you've identified the ownership with a little more investigation, you can generally find those properties. And then there are some ways where you can develop some valuation.
Okay. I know that in my experience, I'm usually finding the commercial property because of an LLC. So maybe it's an individual who is the registered agent for that LLC and they're, an entrepreneur. So it's trackable, right? I can use the tools to find it. And then the other times I have found commercial real estate is sometimes it's more like a surprise, like it's a parking spot in New York City. And that's very different from, owning a strip mall. But when you find that somebody owns a strip mall or an apartment building, what resources are there maybe in the real estate field that we should know we can go and look for what it's typically costs to run an apartment building? And then we could look at something like typical rents to sort of kind of come up with that revenue evaluation.
Yeah, so when I'm trying to determine the valuation of a commercial property, I would generally go online and identify local resources, particularly commercial real estate brokers, who would readily be helpful in giving some context of what rental rates would be for certain properties and what the associated expenses might be. I usually try and find local resources to assist with that. But again, for your prospect researchers, that's a level of detail that you probably wouldn't quite enter into unless it was a really solid lead that one of your major gift officers believes that it's a gift transaction, a gift arrangement that is very likely to occur. Now, I use a source. It's a sort of a digitized online service that will provide an appraised value for a property without having to go hire an appraiser and go spend a fair amount of money and wait a considerable amount of time to get the results. There's a company online called Clear Capital, and their address is clearcapital.com. And you can order an appraisal for $19 from Clear Capital, and they will provide a very thorough researched analysis and give you an appraised value within 24 hours. I use this as a service for my clients, and I do it for them for free. You have to have an account with Clear Capital, so there's a step involved. So that's a resource that if one is serious about identifying values of property, and they do it for residential properties as well, but that's a resource that I use.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I had not heard of them. Very interesting. And $20 is not a big expense for what could be a lot of time. That's great.
Absolutely.
Now, I know you have lots of real estate stories because it's what you do. I know at Devereaux, you were very involved in real estate gifts. Are there any stories you're able or willing to share that people might be interested in hearing about how real estate gifts have come about?
Well, sure. I'm working currently on a very major commercial real estate gift that involves a former car dealership in the suburbs of Chicago. This is a gift to a major university, and it's interesting that, these are very involved. They don't happen overnight. There are allied professionals that are deeply involved where there are tax implications, there are planning considerations, and again, this is a major, major gift that would potentially name a stadium at this university. So a very large gift. And I would just say you need to be patient and you need to work very hard to let the allied professionals give their advice that will impact the overall gift transaction. Sometimes there can be frustrations as we go along and find that there may be issues that surface from time to time that need to be addressed. So it's always, every single gift is always wonderful, of course, and they're all very different. So that's the beauty of the philanthropic process.
I do remember some fun for me to hear about stuff when things do happen, like you mentioned, like maybe there's something bad buried on that property and you don't realize that until some of those allied professionals go in.
That's another great point. And let me address that because I've got another tip here for your prospect researchers. In a commercial property setting, far more often than in a residential setting, there could be environmental issues. And so that's sort of a very important question that if you're seriously looking at a potential gift, that you're hoping to get some guidance on that. And of course, we all know that the thorough process is to order up a phase one environmental site assessment. And that's very expensive. It could cost $22,000, $2,500 and could easily take a month. But here's another resource I have for your researchers. And if you're well along in a particular gift arrangement and you have any concerns about environmental issues, there's a service called nhdreport.com. And you can order up what's called an EDR environmental report. And the cost of this is about $45. And that EDR environmental report is an online service that will research government directories and government sources to identify if there has been any contamination on a particular property or nearby a particular property. And again, that's something that is very inexpensive to order up. You can get a report again in another 24 hours or so, and it will give you a first glance at whether or not there's any likely environmental contamination on a property.
Wow, cool. That is important. And when the nonprofit's mission involves environmental issues, I mean, that could really be of interest.
Yes. Well, I'm not going to get into detail about this, but we isolate real estate risks these days, and it's just the new best practices. And so we utilize LLCs, single member limited liability companies these days, to accept gifts, and the IRS has sanctioned single member limited liability companies as a viable resource for 501c3 organizations to create these separate entities. And then we take title to real estate gifts through a single member limited liability company so that your charity never directly takes title to a property these days and therefore is never subject to whatever potential liability is associated with a real estate gift.
Wow, so that's why they hire you. You know about all these things. It is very complicated. Jeez. Well, here we are. You're advising folks on how to accept commercial property gifts and make that really work for a nonprofit. Why would a donor want to do it? Are you finding people who are retired and the business is no longer operating and so they're left with this property that, really they don't want to give to their children, may have tax implications if they sell it? Or is it just that it's their biggest asset and it's what they want to fulfill their philanthropic objectives?
All of the above.
Yeah.
So a person has been very successful in their career and built a nice business, but maybe they don't have family members that will succeed them in that business venture. And so at that point, they are faced with selling their business or perhaps donating a part of the business. Maybe the business asset, such as the property, would be segregated from the business venture, the commercial venture, and they would sell the commercial venture to another enterprise, but that they would keep the property. And then rather than selling it and incurring capital gains, it's a likely asset that could be then used as a real estate gift to their favorite charity. So that is a very common kind of way that a commercial piece of real estate could become a gift.
So before I let you go, I'm wondering if you have any tips for researchers who want to learn more about real estate generally. Where should they go to answer their questions or to learn about things like commercial real estate?
Well, there are always local seminars that you can identify. You can find speakers that specialize in philanthropy through real estate gifts. I've done a lot of presentations throughout my career. So I think that's a really good starting place through AIP or through the local Plan Giving Council. Keep your eyes open for any presentations that may be on the horizon specializing in real estate gifts. I would think that's a really good starting place right there.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing today, Alan. It was great to talk to you.
Jen, I'm just thrilled to have been with you. Thank you for such a long-standing friendship, and my best wishes to all of your colleagues in the prospect research communities.
That was Alan Thomas, president of Thomas Charitable Advisors, LLC. You can find Alan Thomas online at thomaspg.com. That's Thomas, PG like plangiving.com. And fear not, I've listed those great resources he mentioned in the show notes so you can find them fast.